Hi, I'm Menaka Raman-Wilms, and you're listening to the 200th episode of The Decibel from the Globe and Mail.
We had a feeling, to be honest, that something would happen. And I'd been reading a lot of the news, especially international news, with predictions of, if a war breaks out, there would be millions of refugees. And we talked about it. And we're like, we could fit somebody in.
That's Kasia Smith, who lives just south of Warsaw in Poland. Kasia and her husband, Jordan Smith, wanted to help refugees from Ukraine. So they opened up their home to families fleeing the war. Since the invasion started, more than 1.7 million people have fled to neighboring Poland.
And I'm like, we got to do something. And we did. So we're like, we got to take people in. And since we've done it, yes, it's been very chaotic, but I feel so good about it. Like, it's been really good to do something very, concrete and very, tangible, like taking people in and giving them shelter and keeping them safe.
Kasia spoke to Globe reporter Kathryn Baum. Today on The Decibel, the story of 3 Ukrainian families and the people who welcomed them into their home. Kathryn, thanks so much for being here today.
Thanks for having me back.
So just to get started here, who is Kasia Smith?
So Kasia Smith is a Polish-Canadian woman. She was born and raised in Canada. She spent most of her life in Ontario. She moved to Poland with her husband, who is a New Zealander Canadian, about 5 years ago to start med school, kind of her second career in life. She already has 3 kids, aged 6, 8, and 14. And so this family of 5 has taken in 9 Ukrainian refugees and counting, actually. So they've taken in 3 families so far, 3 Ukrainian mothers and their children. They each have 2 children.
Wow. And so Kasia's in Poland. Does she speak Ukrainian? How is the connection there, I guess?
So she doesn't speak Ukrainian. However, she does speak Polish. And Polish and Ukrainian are similar enough, I gather, that the refugees and Kasia can, sort of get by. There's also one of the Ukrainian refugees, Lilia, speaks a little bit of English, which helps. And then when they're really stuck, they just resort to using Google Translate on their phones. So I reached the women at Kasia Smith's home in Poland and was able to speak to the women through an interpreter. A woman at the Globe named Roma, an editor here, was able to provide interpretation services for us because I don't speak Ukrainian and the women don't speak English enough or well enough for us to converse that way.
How do you want to do this? Am I speaking while she's speaking?
It's probably easier if you want to sort of summarize as best you can instead of trying to do like a live translation.
Because I won't be able to listen. Right. Okay.
One of the women that you spoke to, her name is Yana. Can you tell us a little bit about her?
Yana is a 31-year-old woman from Ukraine, and she fled the country with her 2 children, Darina, who's 4 months, and her son, Danya, who is 3 years. And they made their way into Poland about 2 weeks ago. And just wanted to sort of note that in the story, and as well as I gather for this interview, we have used only the women's first names, and that's for safety reasons. For the most part, the husbands and relatives are back in Ukraine taking part in the resistance.
Roma, maybe we can learn a bit about how Yana got out of the country.
So she's saying that there was a bus that took them from Ivano-Frankivsk to pretty close to where the border was. And then there was a car that took them a bit further, but then there was a point at which they had to walk. And she said there was masses and masses of people and shouting and crying and confusion. And they walked the last 10 kilometers on foot carrying the kids. And then they crossed over on foot. I tried to get her to explain where. It's called Ruszewa. Her husband was in Poland working, and so they came to Poland.
But her husband, it turns out...
That's Kasia Smith again, the woman who's housing the refugees.
we were excited because she's like, listen, after like the 2 days after she'd been here, like my husband's actually in Poland. Could he come here? And we thought, yeah, great. Like, yeah, bring him over, like reunite a family. That would be amazing. So he made his way over, and we were happy because at first they told me that originally the plan was they were going to move to Poland anyway, because this husband had this job and they were saving up money for them to move. But, then she was pregnant with their daughter. So they decided to wait till after the daughter was born. So he hadn't met his 4-month-old daughter yet either, because, it was far, it's expensive.
He went to Poland when she was just 2 weeks pregnant, a half a month pregnant, she's saying. And so he's been there for a year. So he hadn't met her.
Цілу ніч лежав і дивився на своїх дітей, бо малого не бачив, Віка малого ще не бачив, хіба так по телефону.
She said he got there at midnight and he lay and watched her sleep for the whole night because he had never laid eyes on her before.
But then he pulled me aside and he's like, listen, I'm not staying. I'm going back to Ukraine to fight, because it turns out he had been a soldier for 3 years in the Ukrainian army. And he said, and he fought in the Donbass region in 2016, he said, and he's like, listen, I can't sit back watching my old army buddies fighting. My brother is fighting. My friends have all joined up. I can't, with my experience, I can't stand back, and I have to go back. So, he didn't break it to his wife till the next day. Of course, she was really upset, but, she understood, I guess, but like he was so stressed out. I've never seen someone chain smoke so much in my life.
So the expectation had been that they would stay there and that Hitali would work and that they would be there. And he said instead that he has fought in Ukraine before and he understands what this war is and that he was going back to fight.
We told him, like, listen, of course we understand. And we promise we'll take care of your wife and kids as long as need be, like they can stay with us. We'll take care of them.
Like, I don't want to make her upset, but I'm just wondering, like, did she think that she's going to get to go back home? Like, is there anything she left behind that she wished she'd brought?
She said, what else would I have taken other than my children? That's all I need to take.
And like, what gives her hope right now?
That she'll go home one day, that she will go home, that she'll return home. She really, really, really wants to thank Kasia that she took them in and she's helping them and she's overwhelmed with gratitude. I have to say, just even watching Kasia, the reaction of the Polish people has been just astounding. It's been really amazing.
Yana and her kids, of course, are not the only people who are living at Kasia's place now. Who else did you speak to?
So in addition to Yana and her 2 children, there's also 2 women who are actually cousins. That's Lilia and Luda. They also happen to be 31 years old, which is just sort of a funny coincidence that all of the mothers there are 31. And they all have 2 children.
She said she can't hear anything because all the kids are screaming. А ви є родина чи сім'я?
Так, ми двоюрідні сестри.
So my understanding is that Lilia and Luda lived in the Lutsk area in sort of Western Ukraine. And while that area, for the most part, didn't really come under siege until actually this past weekend, my understanding is that there was, however, an explosion of some kind at an airstrip near Lilia's home.
So they left the very first day. She said because they live in Lutsk, they live next to як це називали?
Військовий аеродром.
Next to a war aerodrome. But they live next to something that got bombed. So the very first day, there was 4 rockets that landed. So there was horrible explosions.
Так, я живу на 8-му поверсі.
She said she lives on the 8th floor, and the sound of it woke them up, and they were horrified. She said the windows were moving, and it seemed like the entire apartment was shaking. She said intuitively, it's like you know that it's the start of the war, but you actually just can't believe it.
Wow. I mean, that sounds pretty scary. How did they end up crossing the border after that then? He drove them there and then on foot, or how did that work?
So in all of the women's cases, my understanding is that they all either got rides, whether it was, Luda's husband, or in Jana's case, I believe that she ended up on a bus, basically. They all got sort of close to the border. And then there was so much traffic at the border, just such a long line of cars, that they got out and walked, as I understand it, up to like 10 kilometers. Lilia and Luda, with one child as young as 22 months and the oldest being 9 years old, themselves walking towards the border. And at this point, the women told me that they weren't allowed to cross the border on foot. So everybody was just sort of jumping into strangers' cars to cross the border at this point. It was so early in the war that I think walking across the border wasn't totally happening yet. And so they all just sort of, jumped into vans and crossed the border that way.
And what about their partners? Where are their husbands now?
So Jana's husband, Vitaly, said hello to his family in Poland and went back to Ukraine. And then Luda's husband, as I understand it, is also back in Ukraine. Lilia, she didn't want to talk about her husband's situation, so I'm not totally clear on where he is. But from what I understand so far, and I am in sort of, constant touch with Kasia and the women, the men are alive and their relatives are alive.
How are Lilia and Luda doing in Poland so far? This is a big change, I would imagine, from their everyday life. So how has it been going for them?
They wanted to leave for the sake of their children. They felt it was no way for those children to live their lives hearing, the sounds of explosions and the sirens going off and running up and down to bomb shelters. So I think they are glad to be out of Ukraine. They desperately want to go home. They are holding it together for the sake of their kids. But you can just tell that they're sad and they're worried and they're anxious and they don't know what's going to come next.
It sounds like the little boy had a birthday party there. Did you hear anything about that?
Yeah, so Vladik, he turned 6 on March 10th. And so Kasia wanted to make his birthday feel special. And so she went and got balloons for his birthday. And she wanted yellow and blue, the colors of the Ukrainian flag. But the shop had one blue balloon left and accidentally popped it when they were blowing it up. And so she ended up with a bunch of yellow balloons and purple, because purple was the next best thing.
Close enough.
Close enough.
What are they going to do like tonight or today to just, I don't know, maybe take his mind off of it? I don't know if that's even possible. I don't know.
Кася дуже гарно підготувала нам свято. Вона замовила
amazing celebration.
Спочатку
Kasia. She told her it's not necessary, Kasia. You don't have to do anything. Kasia said it was very important for a child, and she ordered a cake, and she did a big celebration and presents. Що він дістав там на шею?
Yeah. Балони, кульки.
Кульки. She said he got balloons. Це називається кульки. See, I learned a word.
There you go.
Дякую, але аби не було війни.
He said that she understands everything, because when they were wishing him a happy birthday, he said, thank you, but I just want there to be no war. I just want peace. So he understands.
He said, thank you, but I just want there to be peace.
Mm-hmm. No.
Like that's what he wants for his birthday?
З України, і він 2 рази так.
Ukrainian relatives called him from Ukraine to wish him a happy birthday, and he said, thank you, but what I really want is for there to be no war.
You spoke with them a few days ago now, Kathryn. How have they been doing since then?
So I actually spoke with Kasia on Monday morning, and, she was filling me in on how things are going. She sounded a little bit tired, but her group of Ukrainian refugees has actually grown since I wrote my first draft of the story. On Sunday night, she was at the train station picking up a 17-year-old boy. And he had crossed over from Ukraine, leaving behind his mother and his 18-year-old brother, because the 18-year-old brother had to stay. Adult men aren't currently allowed to leave, and the mother didn't want to leave him alone. So now she's got a 17-year-old boy in addition to the 3 Ukrainian families she already has living there.
Do we know how long everyone's going to be staying there in Kasia's house?
I think nobody knows how long this is going to go on for. And I also think nobody knows what they may or may not be able to go home to. And so, the way Kasia and her husband, Jordan, are thinking about it is, they think that this could be a while, and they are fully prepared for it to be several months, to the point where they have actually assembled and installed bunk beds into the space above the garage to better accommodate Luda and Lilia's children who are and families that are up there. So, it could be a while yet, and Kasia and her husband are prepared for that to be the case.
Wow. This is a big undertaking for Kasia. These are a lot of people, literally strangers that she did not know, inviting them into her home. Why did she decide to do this?
I had the same question for Kasia because, like you said, it's a big undertaking, and it's, it's a lot for her whole family. I mean, she's a medical student. She's in the 5th year of med school. Her husband works. She's got 3 children of her own. But for Kasia, it was personal.
So, Poland was a communist country, and my dad and his father, so my grandfather, absolutely hated living under the communist regime. But it was really difficult at the time to leave because people weren't allowed to hold passports. If you wanted to travel anywhere outside of Poland, you had to apply for a passport, like a temporary passport to leave, and then you'd have to give it back when you came back. So eventually, my dad, it was him, his parents, and his sister were all able to get passports. And because they said they were going on a family vacation to visit friends in Hungary. But they actually made their way to Austria. And in Austria, they just stumbled upon a town. And the mayor, I think, of this little town took them into his own home. He put them up in his home. He found them jobs in like a local motel or hotel or something. They just took care of them, and they kept in touch for years. And then when my parents ended up in Canada, they also in turn would help others coming, from Poland mostly, but also from other places. My great uncle had made some money, and he lent them money, and they bought a hotel in Newmarket. And then my dad, he also became a CA. So he would often do he did taxes for people for free. It was always just a value, I guess we grew up with it. If you can, you should help people.
Okay, that's it for today. And like I mentioned at the start of the episode, this is number 200 of the Decibel. We want to thank each and every one of you for listening, following the show, and sharing it with your friends. I'm Menaka Raman-Wilms. Michal Stein helped edit this episode. Our producers are Madeline White and Cheryl Sutherland. David Crosby edits the show. Kasia Mihailovich is our senior producer, and Angela Pacenza is our executive editor. Thanks also to Roma Lutsiu for her translation in this episode. And thank you so much for listening, and I'll talk to you tomorrow.